Make sure you're muted at all times, and if you do have any questions, just pop it down there in the chat bubble on the bottom, and we'll endeavour to answer your questions when it comes to the Q&A. Okay? Whai huhuna kai, tō kamata dotor, kai whai, tō mga honei, tuku atu ke he lifu ko Sam Pilisi, ke whakawhirewea mai me whalawhala, ke kuhai ia, pihia fōki mo Leki, tō whakaholo hata tōra whakahara, whakawe.
Ko whalawhile, whawe mai whalawhile atu kem tōlosi, whawe whakamua ke atua, kua me kai tō tōru ke whalataha e ke he kilunga ke he kupenga hila, ke poko nei he Zoom. Greetings everyone, na Māori, Kiribati Language Week. Greetings to lots of familiar names and faces, and those that don't know me, my name is Asetoa Sam Pilisi, New Zealand born Niuean Samoan. My mother is from the villages of Arasele and Alofi Tokelau, and yeah, done lots of stuff in the community, and just grateful to be part of this space to talk about takalo and some of the things that come out from the usage of takalo, and how perhaps as a community we can work together on some things. So I'll pass it on to Leki.
Hello, Colin, Sam, thank you. Hello everyone. Whakalapalai atu ke mo tolosi ke ngohi ki a tolu e superiso. Mai loanga tolu ne na ke loko hayo ke ngahaku ko pulele ki atoa. Whanau nei I okalana ni surani. Hawa he maanga ko maangele. Hello everyone. I think I know like majority of you in the Zoom. There's a few names I don't know. So greetings to you all. For those who don't know me, my name is Leki. I'm very humbled to be here today on this Zoom. I'm just going to share my 5 cents on what I know in regards to the takalo. My background is in performing arts, and my degree is in Pacific performing arts. So I have a little bit of experience in the Niuean performing arts space, and I've worked on several occasions with Feilo and Sam, and lots of other people in this group as well. So yeah, excited to see what we called it all about today. God bless us all. Thank you. And thank you, TNT. Hi, Zora.
Ia, whalawhala hea tukia tau tolu, ringa ilo au sim tolu au, ko iau hinga hāku, whiawhia lahi, ke puto ia whoki ke he whakahaloanga nei, le Tagata Pulotu Seminar Series. If you do not know me, I'm Ioane Aleke whawai. I've done a lot of work in this space, especially culture and language, or wangahau niue, and I'm happy to be part of this presentation today to share some of the experiences and how we can find solutions to what we're talking or speaking to the takalo being taught here in New Zealand or the diaspora, and also back on Niue. Whakawelahi ke mga honi, wetulu. Now, nei ru atu kia Sam, whakawe.
Hey everyone, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just give a little bit of time just to make sure those that have arrived are connected well. And if there are any issues to not seeing the screen, please just turn off your mic and quickly say so. And then we'll get underway with discussing some of the things around the takalo. Any problems to seeing the PowerPoint presentation or the front slide picture?
You're good? Yeah.
Okay. So again, greetings everyone. this seminar hopefully will just shed some light on a variety of different experiences around the Takalo. And what this presentation will entail will be some historical accounts of the Takalo, which is Niue based, because that's where our people, our language, our anga whakamotu, our customs, that's where it originates from. And then we will go through perhaps some contemporary usages or the use of Takalo in the diaspora or in the places that we now reside outside of Niue, which is primarily New Zealand and Australia. We will look at some things within Polyfest, which is arguably the largest Niue dance festival in the world, just by the sheer numbers that participate in that yearly event, and also because it's been long running. And so myself, Io and Leki will just share a variety of views and hopefully just set the scene for a good, robust Q&A at the end. I will remind what Io said, if you've got questions, just chuck it in the chat, and then we will address those at the end, and just, or have a discussion perhaps on what the Takalo means to us and what are some things that we can do moving forward to keep our culture, our language alive, but also inclusive of the various experiences that we have, because I think we all can acknowledge that we don't all live in Niue, we all don't have the language, but I guess between myself, Io and Leki, we all share the same heart of that if you're Niuean or if you identify as a tangata Niue, then you are Niuean. And so we need to find ways to, keep an inclusive approach to people wanting to be Niuean or be proud of being Niuean and to express themselves as such. So I'll hand this time over to Io, and I'll just direct the slides from my end.
All right. About the Takalo. Now, having been born on Niue and having engaged and being taught by some of the village choreographers and also attending the schools in Niue, I was able to be passed on some of the knowledge and having gained some understanding of what a Takalo is. Now, there are two types of Takalo. One is for ceremonial purposes. So this is only seen mostly when you're welcoming dignitaries onto Niue. For example, governor generals, their visit to Niue. The matakautu whunga whakamotu will do the Takalo, or a village group, or even from the local high school will be asked to do a Takalo. But normally it would be the matakautu whunga whakamotu, but that has changed over time, depending who's organizing this. So the difference between these ceremonial type of Takalo is that a green coconut is actually presented to the dignitary of high rank to consume. Koe fua niu seara, huki, you pierce the coconut and then you pass it on to whoever the party that they're welcoming onto Niue. As you can see there, one of the former governor generals being presented with a forniu. So that's the difference with the ceremonial Takalo, and also in contrast to Takalos that you see that are being performed at the ASB Polyfest or other types of festivals. So the males are always in the forefront of the Takalo. And there's always a leader who do all the calling. And then the ladies or the women, they do take part, but their main part of a Takalo is that they're in the background supporting with the chanting of a Takalo. They are not in the forefront of the Takalo where they do all the crouching around Hakalo Vikoa. And the costumes you can see there, freshly made out of low C. it's either green or it's been baked in a umu to give you that brown texture. And faces are normally smeared in charcoal or malala. Okay, next. Just to give you some historical accounts of a takalo. Now, back in the days, in a takalo, babies were used as a decoy to lure in enemies, and often babies were killed during times of war because of their cries. As I said before, it's always the men, the Tagata Tāne, who are in the forefront of a takalo. And one of those reasons, if we are to deeply look into the culture of Niue, is that sisters of a male are regarded as being of a higher rank. And the duty of the brothers, even though their sister or sisters are being married out to their husband, they have the right to defend their sister. It's not their husband. So if we think about that in a takalo sense, that's why in the forefront it's always the male. They protect, because back in the days, the warriors and their wives and their babies would live in what we call either taue or a kolo. Taue, they're both forts, but a taue is only for warriors to live in. But a kolo is at a much larger scale where families stay together. Okay, so it's the duty of a brother to always defend and protect their sister. And I've put down there, and it's also a practice of Niue, if a man is summoned to go to war, and whilst you're eating, and then whatever's left over, it's the rightful person to consume that leftover food is the sister, not the wife, but the sister. So you can see here why it's very important that the males are in the forefront, because they're the protectors. If you put this into the sense of a takalo setting. Next. All right. Now, a lot of takalos that we see nowadays in diaspora, especially here in New Zealand, there are many people who are opting to do a takalo also in different settings, maybe at funerals. But there is a dance which is done, as part of a celebration of death, which is called whiauhi, very different to what a takalo is. And I think we need to explore more and differentiate what a whiauhi is and what a takalo is. Okay? So this is done in anticipation of the death of an enemy, called a whiauhi, very different to what a takalo is. And not very much is known about whiauhi, and we need to maybe research and do more exploration of what does that whiauhi looks like. Is it like tawheuhi? Tawheuhi is a dance where there's drum beats and people dance around the fire the whole night. Okay, so that's tawheuhi, and whiauhi is different. Whiauhi is in celebration of a death. And yeah, some of those pictures in there also relates to some of the forts. This fort is in Mutalau, called Fupiu. All right, next. And also women played also a part in the wars, but we can say that women were very influential in encouraging men by calling whakamalolo whilst they're in the battlefield. But we wouldn't say that women were in the forefront of doing a takalo. they were the ones who were encouraging the troops, calling out ke whakamalolonga. And in our history, there are a few women that are being recorded in literature that were known to be very courageous in some of the battles that took place in Niue. And some of those women are down here. Sefakalipa, known in the battlefield of Avao, and Whinikalanga, battlefield of Hikuniu, and Malimali Heiki of Mounga Kerekere, and also Hake Hake He Toa and Halaki Kula. And so, as you can see there, yes, women were part of battles that took place in Niue, but not in the actual combat. All right, mainly doing the chanting and encouraging men. All right, and I'll leave it there, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues, and they will elaborate more and share more some of the experiences of a takalo.
Cool, Foe. So I think for most of us in Auckland, we would have been to Polyfest at some stage. We may have performed or we would have watched our family members. For the last 20 plus years, Polyfest has been at Manukau Velodrome in South Auckland. But prior to that, it was at a variety of schools. Polyfest as the festival itself is more than 40 years old. I couldn't find information on when the Niue stage actually started, but I think that's sometime in the 80s. But I think most of us would all recognize that the takalo at the Niue stage is perhaps one of the more favored items of both the performance and the audience. From the late 1990s to around 2013 or 14, females were permitted to perform the item, the takalo item. And obviously, just as a quick recap back to how Polyfest works, is that every group does an entrance, a kamataanga, an exit, whakausianga, and then there's a variety of items to choose from, be it the takalo, tame, which is an action song and dance, and a variety of others. So from the late 90s to about 2013-14, girls were able to dance, which is a little bit more proactive than to what Io's been talking about, which is, I guess, a supporting role. And in 1999, Macaulay, which is an all-girls school, they won that item, the takalo item in that year, which I think had mixed views at the time. There was, at 2013-14, the committee at the time that runs the Niue stage, coordinates the Niue stage, they decided to remove that rule, or to then make the rule only for males to perform the takalo, which, there was a bit of backlash I saw online from some females that perhaps may have danced themselves in the takalo, or are just very pro females being included. But since then, that decision, 2013-14, females at the Niue stage no longer perform the takalo. The takalo, however, in terms of a style, in terms of chanting and the movements, in terms of stomping, etc., lots of groups often use that sort of style in the entrance or exit, kamataanga, which is the entrance, and then the whakausianga, which is the exit. And so some groups have sometimes then used that maybe as a little loophole for co-ed groups to then participate, not in the item, but necessarily still reenacting the moves or the style that the takalo is. I guess from a basic technique point of view, and Leki, you can jump in here if you'd like. the basic movements of the takalo revolves around the stomping or the pahu, which you would stomp and then have a variety of actions. And then from there, there's lots of movements that might come out from there. Leki, was there anything you wanted to add from technique or anything else I've shared thus far?
Yeah, I guess just to provide a little bit further context around the polyfish thing. So there were two different governing bodies of the polyfish. So the old one, the Niue Trust, who were like the OGs, they were the ones who allowed for the females to perform the takalo. So that was under like Defi and stuff. And then that happened for a few years. Then when the Toa Matala committee came in, they changed it and they were like, no more allowing girls to do that. But then there was a loophole in their criteria because there's, for some reason on the Niue stage, there's a Colin Moilolongo for all and Colin Moilolongo Tuai, which is just like open and generic. And that's like sort of open interpretation. So choreographers were like, oh, we can just put it into Koli for all and call out takalo a Koli for all, which they're not wrong because they, if you look at the rules of the polyfish thing, they could get away with it. So that's how girls were still able to do takalo and stuff. And then I think there's like, this huge misunderstanding with when it comes to the kamataanga and the whakaosianga. While Sam was saying like they adopt the technique of the takalo and they put it into the entrance and exit. And the thing with the entrance and exit on the polyfish stages, they're both made up items. So it's really, it's a really gray area and it's kind of hard to differentiate what's what on the Niue stage. If you look clearly at the tame, the technique is so clear in terms of dance form, coming from like a dance perspective. The technique is very clear. There's a lue, a sway from left to right. The legs move. There's a certain way they move in a tame. The same can be said about a meke and then a takalo. But then the Niue stage has these 4 other items which are all open interpretation. So that's where I mainly see schools doing their interpretation of what they think a takalo is. But something that's always kind of stuck with me that someone said to me in Niue was the difference between a takalo, a lolongo tuai, and a ui. So you can jump into this io in case I get the wording wrong. But this person told me that so the difference between a takalo is the context of the words. Like the takalo has to have the challenge in it. So if it doesn't have the challenge, it's not a takalo. And then if it's a single chant performed by one person, it's called a ui. UI, so the ui, they chant, and then if it's a chant but it's not in a takalo style, it's just a chant without the actions and stuff, it's a lolongo tuai. But again, very gray area because I think different people will say different things about it. Ako nagai maiyo. And that was Dance 101 for today. That's you.
So just to add on then, I don't think you was going to jump in. Obviously, there's the stomping and then the actions that come with that. There are some schools that are well known for like their style, or so just variations to their technique. And I guess that's some of the unique things they bring to the polyfish stage and represent themselves as a group. But I guess from the basic formation thing, going back to linking to what Leki's talking about, there's chanting on its own, and then there's chanting with actions, and the basic form of that is the stomping with, I guess, some actions, and we put the challenge in there, then that's when it contextualizes it to a takalo. Just when we start to do some other observations of takalo at polyfish is that some polyfish takalo are very graphic, in terms of the wordings, like stab your eyes, rip it out, blood drip down my face, which is sometimes quite different to takalo in Niue. I guess that's just one of the features of school's interpretation of the takalo and then presenting it on the polyfish stage. Linking back to stuff that Io talked about in terms of the charcoal or the malala, that is shown in a variety of ways at Polyfest. And there's no real general consensus if there are specific designs that mean things, other than people just smear, in our case in New Zealand, or at Polyfest, it's face paint. It's usually just face paint, and that's smeared on people's faces. You see sometimes that's smeared on people's bodies, and then to replace or replicate the fusi hula hula, the redness of the teeth that Captain Cook talked about. Usually schools just use food coloring. Again, sometimes that's in the mouth, sometimes that gets smeared along the body. So it's like there's some mixed interpretations or variety of interpretations of the usage of malala or face paint, and then again the redness. And yeah, schools are all quite different in what that looks like. In addition to performing the takalo, we have the Niue war clubs, which are kataua, and again, a variety of schools use the kataua here and there are perhaps some different movements and actions, or the style can sort of start to change when men are dancing with a kataua, as opposed to just standing there with just their fists and doing set actions. We also see the kataua out in terms of the kamataanga, and often the leaders will hold a kataua and introduce themselves, introduce their school, and perhaps just have some chants that are accompanied with the introduction of themselves and the group. So I guess that's some observations of what takalo looks like at Polyfest. Before I move on, Io or Leki, did you want to add anything further?
Yeah, just to add on to that, and a lot of the colours that are being performed at ASB Polyfest, you can actually see the style of the different villages, the way how they dance, or even some of their own takalos that they were performed in Niue and now are being retaught here in New Zealand. And even it reflects also the tutors that are New Zealand born. So they've taken this knowledge of what a takalo is and have added their own experiences and also the other influences of the different types of genres that they've seen or being exposed to. It could be Māori or other cultures that are here in New Zealand. And you can actually see that coming through in a lot of takalo at ASB Polyfest. And I think there's a slight shift of some of these takalos, which is taking away the essence of what the underlying meaning of what a takalo is supposed to be. Yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Leki, if I may add. Okay. So if we consider that one of the biggest platforms for takalo in Auckland in particular is the Polyfest, the takalo doesn't just sit at Polyfest. That's perhaps one of the biggest catalysts for our young men, and obviously, as we've raised earlier, sometimes our young women learning about the takalo, learning about words, learning about style, learning about the katoa. But it doesn't just sit there. Then the takalo comes out of Polyfest and out of the schools into the community. And we'll just share perhaps a few observations of what the takalo looks like in the community, in particular in New Zealand and Australia. So I think it's no surprise to everyone in this room that that kai tangata, the takalo composed by Meke Etuata, which was composed for a Hakupu rugby tour in 1964, is perhaps the most well-known takalo that most of our people know. And this is often the takalo or variations of it or words of it, taken parts of it, that is performed, if we want to call it that, at birthdays and funerals, which Eels briefly touched upon. And when we look at Takalo videos on YouTube or on Facebook. Again, primarily it's the Kaitangata Takalo that is used. And when we make a comparison to perhaps the ceremonial Takalo challenge, there are a few examples of that online, and that often is done in Niue, like Io has shared about. To date, I've seen, I think, like little performance or little examples of that in New Zealand or Australia. And I think in that welcoming challenge area, I think at times people have used the kaitangata in that sort of space as well, which sometimes gets a little bit grey. I think most people would be aware of the issues and the usage of takalo, and in particular kaitangata at funerals. That's been debated several times online. And perhaps one of the main topic points around that is around the appropriateness, the graphicness of the words, and then trying to align that with, I guess, the occasion and the context of it, and I guess what the words demonstrate, and the meanings out of that, and then perhaps wanting to honor and pay respects to a loved one. Aside from funerals, and then which are perhaps a somber affair, but can have lots of emotions attached to that, then which are you wanting to respect and honor someone. There are birthdays which sometimes can be a bit more celebratory. The colours also been used by our sports teams in New Zealand, Australia, but also out of Niue as well, to lay the challenge. And lots of Pacific nations have adopted that world challenge, which mainly been spearheaded by the All Blacks and the Haka. And then everyone's had their own variation of that. So we see sports teams also use the takalo, and that was the case as well with the Hakupu rugby team and their tour to Rarotonga in 1964. One of the photos up on the, I think, depending how you look at it, top right corner, Tauwhata Niue was a dance group, I believe, from maybe the late 90s to the late 2010s or so. And they were a male dance group based in Auckland. And they traveled extensively around the world to dance festivals. And so they, did some singing and other cultural dance, but in particular, they carried with them the essence of the takalo and how they saw the takalo and their interpretation of that. And I guess from outside of Polyfest, kept that alive as a art piece. I think we can all know brothers, cousins, ourselves, and acknowledge that the takalos are quite a central and perhaps a beloved thing for many of our males and some of our females, especially outside of Niue and in New Zealand and Australia. And it's one of the go-to things that we use to connect with each other, to identify ourselves as a Niue person, and also to express elements of, I guess, our connection to our language and our culture. And so a few photos here, I think, are from Australia. And we see takalo pop up on YouTube in a variety of places. Leki, did you have, and then Io, do you have things to add to that?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing I noticed in the Niuean community in Auckland is the adopting of the polyfish style, the takalo, into other contexts, which sometimes doesn't make sense or translate as well. For example, I went to my auntie's birthday and my cousins did a takalo, and it was like they did a greeting to welcome their nana, but they went like, "Whakalawhatu manana!" It doesn't make sense when you listen to the words. They go, "Hello, nana," but they were like doing it in the style like, "We're gonna eat you," and they did this action like to their nana, and they was just like, "You don't do that to your nana. That's incorrect." But they didn't know because they only know what they know. from polyfish. So it's a very like blurred line. And in a way, you wanna the people who do know that that's wrong, like your automatic thing is to just go, oh, just tap it on, man. Like you know, our Niueans are like they'll just look at it and down it. But I think there's a real problem with that our generation, New Zealand-born generation, don't know if it's wrong or if it's right. They're just like their heart is there. They're trying to do something nice. Like my cousins were trying to do something nice for their nana, but they didn't know it was inappropriate to do this to their nana and go, "Whakalawatu, nana, rah." Like it was just So I think that's where a huge like the gap lies there, Sam, that we always talk about is how do we help the gap and the generations that don't really have that grounding, because some of them, for example, the New Zealand-born Niueans don't have the grasp of the language, so they're just trying to hold on to something that's Niuean for them that they can do. And definitely backing up what Sam said about this, people's perceptions of the Takalo have like people think it has to be savage and has to be like rah, and it has to be about eating people, and that's mainly because of the kaitangata Takalo. Like if you look at the words, like the way that Meke composed it uses like descriptive lyrics to intimidate the opposing team, like saying, "We're gonna eat you. Ko matolu nei koe tau tangata kaitangata. Ta keleanga hea tua fisikila." Like take it to the dwelling place of the god fisikila. Like the way that it's written gives this perception that well, and then I guess with the polyfish style, the whole savage thing, which our generation has a huge buy into. And for those of you, the young ones in the chat, like the savage thing is our kind of like our thing to think. So I guess the challenge is like exploring. For me, I'm interested in exploring those other kind of takalos that are not about, and I think the same thing, we talk about the sheep, but there's takalos that are not centered around killing people and around around the whole like cannibalism, savage thing. Because there's I remember Kelston back in 2000 and something when they did a takalo about the weather, and like it was about the storm. Because I can't remember which year it was, but it was like about the cyclone, and it was so cool, it was so different. And that's always one of the takalos that I remember, because it wasn't and it wasn't about eating other people. It was just, and I think there's a few like writers who are starting to explore other narratives of takalo, which is exciting as well. So yeah. Anything to add to that? Did I just go off on that?
Before I hand it to Eel to add anything further, I think when we make some comparisons or we look at looking at how takalo is one used in New Zealand and Australia and its frequency, if we go back to what Eel talked about in regards to the takalo being ceremonial, in Niue it's quite special. It is it comes out at a special occasion. And there's some reverence put into that. And I guess in New Zealand and Australia, it's an everyday thing now. It's it's at a party, it's at school, it's at the sports field. It's used way more in New Zealand and Australia than it is in Niue. You don't hear a takalo unless it's a special occasion. And in Niue, they have context. It matches what the occasion is, and then the takalo is then executed as such. And at the moment, we've just got an all-purpose takalo, which is primarily kaitangata, and we use it everywhere and at any time. And yeah, I guess there's some challenges in that, but I think for now, it's good for us to acknowledge that that's something that our people know, especially our males, and we need to consider how do we then use that as a positive, because it's highly recognizable, the takalo, even in its perhaps variation of it being the savage type. At the moment that, is perhaps you could say that nearly every Niue kid knows what a takalo is. They might not know the words fully, but they'll know what a takalo is. You ask them what a tāme is, or ask them what a meke is, ask them what lolongo tapu is, then it starts to waver. Yeah, Io, did you want to add anything further just to some of, I guess, perhaps some observations of how Takalo is outside of Niue and New Zealand and Australia?
Yeah, I believe that the ASB Polyfest is one of the biggest avenue in reforming the way how Takalo looks like in diaspora. And I think it's having the understanding for its purpose and when it's performed and how does it look like? Why are certain actions done in certain ways? Why is there paint on their face? And all these things, which a lot of us who are New Zealand born, who haven't been educated or haven't been given the background. It's like you're taking the idea of this name, Savage Island, and you're shaping it into that form of a Takalo. And it comes out really very harsh in the actions that through that main Takalo, ko mautolu ko te tangata kei tangata. And at times, we disagree because Takalo now has become a something that a lot of us New Zealand-born can relate to, and something that we can unpack right there at that very point to show our love, our appreciation at different sorts of occasion. And yeah, to me, it's coming back to having that understanding and the basis. But for me, there is room that we need to also develop or write new Takalo that suits people that are living in diaspora for specific purposes. It may be not called a Takalo, it may be called a Whiauhi or called a Ui. So we can, differentiate what a Takalo is when it's appropriate to perform it.
Yeah, I think before we wrap up with perhaps some discussion around how do we move forward from this, my take on this is at the moment, one, kai tangata, and then two, the Takalo in its form as a dance piece. We've got an all-purpose, fits in every occasion approach to this. And even if the whole is a triangle and then the Takalo is a square, we just try force it in and we just make it work. And I think in New Zealand, we have the luxury of that, yeah, it may work, or Australia. But in Niue, it doesn't really fly like that because most people live within and under the banner of Niue Anga Whakamotu, which is the customs and the traditions of who we are. And at the moment, what tradition tells us is we don't have ways to explain from a Niue context, if we are happy, how do we display that? And the Takalo at the moment is, in New Zealand, is fashioned that way. To tell a little story, I graduated earlier this year, and maybe about 20 minutes before going on stage, one of my brothers was texting me and was like, oh, bro, once you get up, call your name. And if I do, ko mautolune, will you back me up? And I gathered what he was proposing. He's my little brother. He's trying to honor me. And I felt that, but I replied back just going, oh, no, thank you, bro. That's not the right time and place. Because for me, my understanding is that those that I hold as cultural pillars in my life, and some of them still live in Niue now, is that if I was to graduate, the function was in Niue, I wouldn't expect any of them to stand up and do a Takalo for me, let alone that being kai tangata. And so I think there's some conversation around context and trying to understand how do we use things, cultural constructs, or be it dance, be it chants, be it songs, to fit the occasion. And I think there are some things that we have a legacy within, or legacy that we can draw on from historical context. And there are some things that are going to evolve and that may sit outside of anga whakamotu. And I think that's an exciting space, perhaps to consider that it's maybe not a Niuean thing, because we don't have Niuean things to explain what it is. And there might be other movements of maybe labels, of just trying to better explain some things that we are now going to use in contemporary context. I digress a little bit, but I think just moving into sort of some of what Ioane, myself, and Leki were saying anyway, is that I think we have to consider that things are moving, things are changing, and yeah, the bulk of our Niue community live outside of New Zealand, and we are going to be influenced by a variety of things. In particular, here in New Zealand, if we reflect, or if we look at what the nearest version, if we call it that, of the takalo is in the Aotearoa New Zealand context, it's the haka. And that's a very strong visual art piece or dance form, cultural tool. And so it's very well known here in New Zealand. And I feel perhaps in some ways, maybe we are fashioning the takalo to be enacted in the same way that a haka has, and the hakas can be for happy occasion, sad occasion, express a variety of emotions. But I think, yeah, as a community, we need to consider that the takalo is well known. The takalo is something that many of our males look forward to. And then, so how do we, with some education, some guidance, including people as opposed to scolding people, how do we maybe put things into some better boxes? I bring up a little example that was shared with a few other Niuean guys, I think a few weeks ago. There's the funeral aspect, which Eels talked about. There's that, what was the name again, Eel? Whiuhi?
Yeah, whiuhi.
So there's whiuhi, which is already exists or has existed in the past. Then there are some commentary online about, I think most of the main feedback around people disagreeing with the kaitangata takalo being used at a funeral is, one, the takalo doesn't suit the funeral. There's a war and challenge and it has its purpose. So that's one thing. Then the second part is obviously the graphic nature of the words, which suits at Polyfest, which suits at the sports field, but seems like an odd fit on top of the plot or the gravesite. And so I think from most of the commentary that I've seen, people seem like it's an odd fit. Those that are pro that just go, oh, well, at least people are trying to replicate their Niueanness or be proud of their culture. And so I think there needs to be a middle ground, and one that was there was a funeral, I think about a month or two ago, the Kauia family, and there was a purposely composed takalo that wasn't graphic in that nature. They got some cultural expertise within their family, which obviously is a blessing and a bonus for them. They wanted to do a chant of sorts, and they were able to appropriately do that. Not that they perhaps wanted to get the approval from the community, but it was something special to them. And it meant something for them, and they did that at the gravesite. Leki and Io, did you have any other suggestions around the sort of the funeral stuff?
It's a tricky one, because it's almost that thing like you can't tell people how to mourn at the funeral. Like, I know if that was my family's funeral and they wanted to put takalo, they'll do it, even if it was wrong. Like, they wouldn't care what other people would think, because they'd be like, this is I'm burying my person, I'll do whatever the hell that I want to do, even though culturally it's incorrect. So it's a really tricky conversation to navigate. But definitely encourage the composition, of like the new compositions, and there's ones that are composed specifically, because I get it, not every Niuean can sing. Because usually when you get to Niue, they sing at the Te Lolongo when they like bury people. We have hymns and stuff. That's how we honor them. But then, what if you're a New Zealand-born, tone-deaf Niuean that doesn't know Niuean songs? What are you gonna do? But you're confident to stand there and go, "Kamate." Like there has to be some, like what you said, Sam. There has to be some middle ground, and there has to be something, some way that we can help this group of Niueans who want to do stuff like that. personally, I wouldn't do a takalo at a gravesite, but maybe again the problem is around the wording. Maybe it's not a takalo we do at grave sites. Maybe it's no longer ways, but we have to compose specific ones that suit the occasion and the appropriate context wording. Yeah, it's a hard it's a hard one there because I can already see everyone in Niue would cringe straight away because they don't do that in Niue. And like you said, Sam, the takalo Niue is performed with like such reverence and honor. Even that first slide you had about with the fornu, and the guy was holding it. I remember when I asked Lave and Niue, and I was like, "Oh, where did they get the fornu from? Did you just grab it from there?" It's like, no, we grow it specifically for the occasion. So that for even down to the coconut that they presented to the person coming, like it's been grown specifically for that thing. So there's so much like weight and history and honor and the takalo. So I think the wording is definitely a huge issue. Like I actually don't think it's a takalo we should be performing at funerals here in New Zealand or abroad. But definitely open to the idea of people composing chants and honoring people in that way. I think there's that one in Niue that what's that one io and it's like I've seen people do that, like that's appropriate, right?
Would that be considered a takalo or is it a chant?
I don't know the full wording of the thing.
Yeah, that really depends on the lyrics.
I've seen the Hekos do that. They do the Masini
that chant, Leki? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I've seen it at the Maukus like before.
So that apparently that chant comes from the part of the old ceremonial thing that they used to do back in the day, a long time ago. So they used to have this little ceremony where they'd string up this little wooden idol, and then they'd throw like a tasika at it, and then once that little wooden idol was struck, they would sing that Ke Masetoa he ha, and apparently it's related to the what's his name? Limatoa? The god of the sea.
Limaua.
The rough sea. Limaua, yeah. Rough seas at Alofi. So I think that's why that family specifically.
I've heard it done at a funeral before.
So I think that seems appropriate, a little more appropriate than what we're currently sitting at.
Kristen, io, whai manata whakakai?
Nā kai, koe nei te manatu ni whakakise te reki, talia whoki mai o mui tō manatu ia.
The only thing I would like, the only thing I'd like to add to the perhaps funeral process that's way more apparent in Niue than it is here in New Zealand is men growing out their beard or their hair. And I guess from that point of view, that seems to be a male responsibility or a response to wanting to honor and pay respect and obviously take on this element of mourning of the loved one. And then obviously that connects into the unveiling where they then would shave that off. That may not be appropriate for or what people want to do here in New Zealand or Australia, grow their beard. They might want to just put out their emotion through a chant and some actions. But I think there are some things that people associate with already, like a funeral setting. There's that chant there, there's the growing of the beard and stuff like that. That was like already lived practice in Niue. But I guess it's in New Zealand and Australia, us trying to find the middle ground, to better align or place things with cultural frameworks, but also, I guess, where we live and how people want to try and express themselves. So there's the takalo stuff. Then there's also, I guess, the takalo, and even if we're using the wrong word for it, but kai tangata then gets used in a celebratory way. It's at birthdays. It's to say I've seen it as in a way for people to say thank you. I've had it performed to me. And I didn't know how to feel about that. I knew what they were trying to do. We were preparing for a project, and then kai tangata was then performed to me. I didn't know how to feel about that, other than I just said, I appreciate what the sort of thank you. But at this stage, I don't know if the takalo and kai tangata in particular is the appropriate way to say thank you. Leki or Io, have you got anything to say around that? No?
I've seen other chants being used like to thank people for like in the context of thanking someone. Again, same tricky conversation to navigate because we do have like thank you things composed. Like someone's there, every single occasion. You know they're gonna do that. And then what do Niueans do? Like, do we need a song or do we need again another chant with appropriate words to say thank you?
Oh,
So it's the same convo way, like the Koma Tolune just is the all purpose, everything by default. But I think it's because we don't have anything else. So yeah, exciting to see what else.
Io, whai mana tu whakakai?
Yeah, for me, it's like depending on what family you come from, where some of my family members, they already have some compositions that are already set for specific purposes, and also working out what's appropriate for specific, like I said before, purposes or sorts of celebrations, instead of just using ko mautolu koe tau tangata kai tangata. And it can, I mean, it doesn't have to be a takalo. It could be a lolongo tāme or a lolongo tuai, or even a ui. For me, it's easier to do a ui when I'm on my own, where if it's a takalo, I believe it's better to perform in a group. And the lyrics have to fit the purpose of why you're doing it. But I do a lot of ui in different spaces. When I'm on my own, that's the way how I do it. Go it.
Pull it to you, Leki and Io. Maybe because I feel like although we've talked about titling appropriate things and what it means, when it's in this context, what the chant is or what the dance, or if it's a takalo or not. Do you guys think the takalo is the same as the haka and its same universal purpose or function?
Yes and no. It looks like a haka, like when we put them like side by side, they look exactly the same. But I guess the difference with the haka is like a haka specifically can be composed for like to tautoko or to afi someone like something or someone else, whereas the takalo purpose was not really there. It's the takalo is the challenge, just straight challenge. Then there's hakas that are actually composed for funerals. There are different types of hakas, whereas we don't have that level or that depth of the takalo, I feel, as the art form for Niueans. So yeah, I guess aesthetic wise, it looks like a haka, but meaning wise, no. Like I feel like the Māori have got so much more depth in what their haka is to what we're currently portraying as takalo for Niueans.
Kai kua koe mai Io?
Ta taina hako tau manatu mo Leki. Ia, tonu seka tau manatu ia Leki. Mui tua whukini hako tau manatu ki hene.
So I think from my point of view, like ways moving forward is perhaps that's also a starting point, is perhaps to provide some clarity around our similarities and also differences between the kalo and the haka, and then also finding better ways depending to context, putting chants or whatever we're trying to do in different columns, because at the moment the kalo is all purpose, every occasion, happy, sad, wanting to respect someone or honor them, wanting to scare them away. It's the same thing. And so I guess that's the challenge. One of the challenges ahead is to, perhaps clean that up. Io, you brought this up earlier in regards to Polyfest. What do you think would be some perhaps ways moving forward in regards to that area of Polyfest? We've talked about some of the perhaps challenges or issues there. And Ioane and Leki, what do you think would be some suggestions for us to move forward that would be positive and would help bode well for us trying to keep people included into the language and culture, but also maybe provide some clarity?
Well, for me, is working together, both young and old, and creating a space where it's safe, where you can express yourself, and then we can agree to form what a takalo is, and also to consult with our brothers and sisters back on Niue, and also putting it into writing, what a takalo looks like here in a New Zealand setting or Australia, and what does it look like also in Niue, so we can have a clear understanding. When we talk about takalo being performed here in New Zealand, it's for these reasons. And if you're doing it in Australia, the same thing. And also in contrast to Niue. But there'll be some underlying values or aspects of a takalo that still holds value, for the basis of creating a takalo for a tangata Niue living in diaspora, and also for those who take part in the ASB Polyfest, to have rules written clear and defining what a takalo is. That could be one of the avenues, Sam.
I think if I just add to that, I also think it's defining what a takalo is and also what it isn't, just to perhaps provide some clarity. But Leki
no, I agree with what you're saying, what you said as well, Sam. I think when you look at the diaspora, the Polyfest being the largest platform for Niue dance, my personal opinion is that the whole stage needs a rewrite of the criteria and restructure, because there's so many loopholes in the criteria that leave things to open interpretation. And that's why we have all these. And if you look at that, that's the most influential platform. All the kids are watching that, everyone is watching the Polyfest, and then everyone's copying whatever is done there and then taking it to all these different spaces. So we have a replica of whatever happens at Polyfest. So I think definitely a rewrite of the criteria, because the criteria allows for those things to happen. And when you compare us to the other stages at Polyfest, we're the only ones who have that problem. We're the only ones who have, not to down the Niueans, but we're the only ones who have made up categories. No other stage has that. Niueans the only stage that actually has that. And I don't blame the committee. It's a lot of work to do. There's a massive amount of work that needs to be done and the rewriting of the criteria. But if you look at the Hawaiian, the Mere Monarch Festival, they have a clear section. So there's Hula Awana and Hula Kahiko. There's the Tuai and the Fo'o, and it's clearly labeled out. Everyone's understanding is the same because it's written, and it's no one can change it. You know what's old and you know what's new. But the Niuean stage has this blur where we just mush everything together. And then I feel like we use this as such a cop-out all the time. No, it's because our village does this differently. Oh, we do that differently. Niueans use that all the time as an excuse. And yes, that's correct. But there should also be a general consensus of what is Niuean when it comes to performing arts, when it comes to dance, when it comes to the technique. The technique of the tame is so clear. It's a pahu. Everybody pahus. We pahu differently in different villages, but we all pahu. We lue side to side, but some villages do it differently. But that's a general technique for the tame. So if we can do the same we just need like a really dedicated committee to put together the work to do for the takalo and all our other art forms. And then we need to inject that into the Polyfest and then start pulling up the schools when they're not following the criteria and they're making stuff up. Then we can start calling it out and being like, oh, hey, that's actually not Niue and you just went and made that up. But that's cool. Put that on Lolong for or whatever. Like just clear lanes for each thing so that our young people still feel like they can express and be creative, but then our old people we can still grasp onto what is the heart of our Niue, Koli, and Lolongo and stuff. Because we do have to leave room for like some contemporary stuff to grow. Otherwise, we're just going to be like this culture that stays still and never grows. And also, like, well, most of our old stuff is dying with our elders because they're not going to share. Because you're not from my village, you can't sing our song because the winds are like that, 100%. So I feel like this is a big convo, Sam. Like, you know, I think we all know this is mess. There's a lot of work to be done in it. But I definitely think the Polyfest is the. I'm not saying to go attack the Polyfest committee. I'm just saying like we need to start there and yeah, just try and help carry the load and clean up the cycling mess. Hello.
And can I also add just one thing there, Sam? We also need to grow our leadership within the performing arts, not only performing arts, but anga whakamotu and mga hau Niue. And I think Polyfest could be one of the ways where we can train them up, and all these things will be involved in that leadership training. So we don't get a repetition of the same sort of issues that we're actually facing at the moment.
Yeah, I think that dovetails into perhaps just some last remarks around moving forward, Io and Leki, and then I think we've spoken quite a bit, so you can hand it to the Q&A and we'll just generate some two-way discussion there. But you brought up like capacity building, and I think that's really important. You know, lots of people can dance, but we need to have more people that can compose, more people that can choreograph, dance, or arrange chants. Otherwise, it stays stagnant. And I guess just some of these photos talk to a project that most of us, or some of us, were involved in last year. And it's just trying to share knowledge. It's not good enough for just myself, Leki, Io, and a handful of others to know knowledge, and it's about sharing it to others. And hopefully, maybe we might have some news to come out of the TNT page, maybe in a couple of weeks, about perhaps another project that will help talk to what Io's talking about, developing leadership, sharing knowledge around how to compose. It's one thing for us to tell people to compose a more appropriate chant, but it's another thing to provide space and tools and knowledge to help people grow those skills and capacity to then apply it back into their families and communities. I think so just some last thoughts around moving forward is that you also brought it up too, is that we need to utilize the cultural knowledge that we have around us, the tufungas, the experts that are there, pick their knowledge. It's important to keep that connection back to Niue as well. And for those of us that have family or just some connections, is to pick their brain and try to understand how it works there. And then I think lastly, which I brought up via the example of my graduation, my own personal responsibility is it's for me to educate within my own family. Like Leki mentioned earlier, no one's right, so to speak, to turn up to a funeral and see a family doing a takalope komo tulune or another one, and to tell them, oh, you're wrong. That's not my job to do that. And I think for me, my own personal responsibility and perhaps some ways moving forward for all of us is to just share within our own families and to try and help and guide and bring people on the journey. And that's what I did with my brother at my graduation. I could have just easily said, yeah, all good, G, get up and do your thing from the stands and I'll do it, or I won't, but just let you do it. For me, it was about love. And she said, no, that's not what we do, but thank you. I appreciate the thought. And that puts some just personal responsibility back on me, just to, yeah, practice what I preach, so to speak. And I've, I guess, got a mandate because that's my family. But I don't have a mandate into other people's families. All we can do is just suggest and share stuff and just help rather than tell people what to do. Because if you know Niueans, just the worst thing you want to do is tell them what to do, because they'll do the opposite. But I think that's where we've got to, Io, and everyone else in the room is just, I guess, share different things, and I'll hand it over to you, Io, from Male Male. Ki whakia mo I tautou ka hae tau nena ki loto hi chat.
Whakawelahi ma Sam. Mahonei tuku atu ko hai nei whaihuhu. I saw a couple of comments in there. Joe, did you want to ask a question? We have Joe in here and also Carlos and Rob, who added a few comments in there. So who wants to go first? Carlos, would you want to go first? Because you're smiling there and back over there in La Capa.
Yeah, I think my comment just touched on what Sam just finished saying about Niueans not listening. Or if you deliver the message in the wrong way, we kind of purposely go the opposite way, which kind of speaks to the lack of or absence of like authority over things Niue. Like who is, like, do we put enough reverence on our asafo or our tufungas? Like I hate comparing ourselves to other people, but like if we look at the punakes in Tonga, like there's a lot of respect and they're respected for their knowledge. I don't know if the same applies in Niue with anything to do with our culture. Like it just seems like we do our own thing, like, and then we can't expect the youth to listen to us when we don't even listen to each other on other matters in regards to Niue. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, I hope I made sense. So look.
Yeah, Carlos. I totally agree with that. And I encountered that when I was growing up in the anga whakamotu, having been told how many times that you're wrong, and you don't have the authority to do certain things. But for me, you look around and our anga whakamotu and our language, and a lot of mamatua have passed on, and who's gonna grasp onto some of those things? For me, so I use that as an opportunity to change some of those types of habits or the types of thinking. But also at the back of it, you do it in a whakaririfu manner, and you don't tamper on other people's whakaririfu. So over these years, I've learned how to go about or maneuver myself without getting into being told off. But I think you have to experience that, and then you think of it like as an opportunity. Create something positive out of it. Even though, like, some people would say you don't have the authority to do that. But if we do not create these resources or capture some of these significant aspects of our culture, then who else is going to do it? Because a lot of times now that when I think of it, looking back, some of these the kids or some of these people that were saying things like that to me, who have come to me now to ask for help. See, so I mean that's my way of looking at that, Carlos. maybe Sam and Leki would have a different perspective.
Kalawhalai atu ke he taulilifu kua whakalataha ke mamea nei. Tagata Pulotu, Ioane, Zora, Piani, kia koe ma Sam, mo Leki, mo e tau atuhau. My contribution to the seminar is more of an endorsement, like it's more of a performing, we have to learn it because we're going to perform it. In actual fact, it's already there in the history of our families and how the oral tradition is passed. And the Pacifica Polyfest have highlighted a lot. And, I think when you say what is the right protocol of the takalo and the different categories, but in this day and age, it's changing, and we have a lot of influences. But as long as we get the core meaning and the story behind it and the context, then we'll be able to carry that, because we're not fierce, like savage people in general. It's the way how it's performed, and it has to be fierce, and but in actual fact, it's a culture, it's spiritual, and it's a ritual, and every there's different occasions for certain takalo, and now they say don't do this at a funeral or whatever, but the context is very important, and things can happen. Not only as in performing, maybe in, worship, in family gatherings, you can just compose takalo, but more so it's a challenge to the opposition, like, how the sports team have composed that takalo. And they talk a lot about, copyright, and this belongs to our family and village. But the encouragement is to keep on, and we see now that there's a second and a third generation, and because we're living away from Niue, we have to learn it. But thank you for the time, and just very grateful that just being part of this. I was born in Niue, brought up in Niue, so you sort of get to see the difference. But it can work wherever we are. So as long as we embrace and love our culture, and keep the stories, keep the stories going, and then just creating more rituals like that, so we can be more Niuean, I guess, and hold on to our culture and identity. Whakawelahi, am tola tau mamnakianga si piani ke tau ke whakatumau e whakako ke he tau tamatala me te pulotu. Koe na ia, tolu kia.
Koe turo, koe. Rob, you had a comment added into the chat. Do you want to elaborate more on that? Or?
I think for the work kita tulus gue lain hak ke betul yeah, sorry, I'm a bit nervous now with these great fluent speakers in here. Checking up a bit, but man, just really, I was just making a comment, just really kind of reiterating really what's being shared. I think it's definitely clear that we need more reference material for our culture in general, and academic spaces, but also through our just through our people, especially the people who have the knowledge, being able to compose the new items and pass on those lessons. I think we're in a really exciting time within our culture. that there's this huge thirst for the knowledge. Yeah, and I was, I guess, just an example of kind of the transitional points that we're in. You know, I was one of the audience that was in the same room that at the time as one of the young guys in a room full of people. Wanted to thank Sam and then the rest of the people in the Tagata project, and got up, and I kind of figured he was calling out for us to do a Tagata, and I was thinking like, oh no, surely not, kind of not the thing for it. But then you know, like sensing his heart's in the right place, just getting up to support him, show his respects for our leaders. So yeah, I think we're kind of moving through that, but I think as more people like yourselves create new opportunities and new material for our young people to be used to, then I think you know, we will get to that point where Kamate, the Maori version, which was universal for lots of occasions, you know, back when I was younger, no longer holds that weight. It's more for people who don't really know the culture or are overseas trying to show their connection or heritage to New Zealand. But I guess, sorry, I've been going on a bit, but a quick question. You know, we're very fortunate to be an audience with Reverend Toma, I think in the second week of the Pulotu series, and he was talking about the spiritual connections with kaitangata. And I think one of the things that's really important in the kaitangata takalo is the story. And I think that's as much as a pull for our people to connect to that story of how, with spears and stones, our people were able to push away the might of the British Navy and Captain Cook. And I think that's something that we should hold on to, whether we continue to tell that story through the takalo or come up with other ways where we can do that through song or whatever. But I think that's one thing that we should definitely continue to encourage and hold on to. So in vain, I guess in that vein, the question is around how we channel that spiritual connection that we intrinsically have to that story and perform that throughout takalo. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? How we channel that into a new piece?
Yeah, tu watu kia mua ma Leki mo Sam.
For my Rob, ke he huhu. I'll attempt that first and I'll hand it over to Leki. For me, the project, the Takalo project last year, a few of us were involved in. Deliberately just takes a strengths-based approach at what the Takalo is. And yes, there's some lots of gray areas in that, but I think we can all acknowledge that the Takalo is very popular for many of our young people. And then rather than creating lots of restrictions to that, I think we need to capitalize on that and find ways to use it as a tool to engage, and perhaps educate, but also be open to how things evolve and move forward. I think there is a challenge for many of our people, given that maybe in search of the spiritual connection, I guess the elephant in the room is that our language is still, our language statistics is still really shocking. And my work in going into the community and lots of schools is that lots of our families have yet to return to Niue. Some don't have family back in Niue. And so whilst I think that the kalo or other things can have a spiritual element in that, I think in a holistic approach, that also needs to be embodied with language and customs. It needs to be embodied with this return back home. Otherwise, what kind of spiritual connection are we framing this from if we haven't seen the makasea, if we haven't seen the coconut tree swaying, etc.? And whilst I will acknowledge that many of us will maybe live the majority of our lives or the rest of our lives away from Niue, I think just in isolation, these projects away from home might not fully hit the spiritual mark. Before I just hand it over to Leki, up until a few years ago, none of my siblings had been to Niue. I was one of those kids that got sent up very early on those scholarships for being well behaved. So I was very blessed and went as a primary school kid, but none of my siblings had been up until maybe about 3 years ago. So all my brothers, we went up with our Samoan dad. One thing when I arrived to Niue, and it's nice being in Niue, you feel the heat, etc. Most of my time I live in Awasele, and if you drive on the inland road from the airport and you drive down, you have to go through the village of Tukuitonga, and when you come through, then you see sort of the lookout point Sepa, and you see sort of the coastline. For me, when I return back to Niue, I feel happy when I arrive at the airport, but for me, the spiritual connection of being home, that only starts to become apparent when I'm at the top of the hill in Tukuitonga and looking out to Sepa, and you see parts of Awasele. The connection back to that is that one of my brothers went on his own with his partner last year before COVID hit. And I had told him that story. I said, oh, we arrived to Niue, it's cool, but it's not until like we're sort of heading home or close to home. And he said when he was driving through after the airport, and then when they got to the top of the hill and overlooked to Awasele, or the bay and stuff like that, he said he felt that same like connection. And it's just like, oh, like that anticipation that he was like nearly home. And so for me, that comes down to like this fruition and this realization that that spiritual connection comes to home, and that is Niue. And I do think that the kalo, we can find some spiritual connection to that. But just to round off, I think that in conjunction with a visit home, some strengthening of our language skills or connection to that will help. I have dragged that on a bit. Ko lo te launga haku, ko mole mai matumatakainang. Leki, tukatu ka koe, ko
But I get what you mean, Sam. It's like, because when I was young, I remember all I heard when I was growing up was like, oh, if you want to be a real Niuean, you have to go back home. You have to go like live there. You have to go. And I used to hate old people for saying that. And I used to be like, "Ooh, shut up, don't tell me what to do. I'll go when I want." But I never realized that until I actually went there myself. Like, so for me, my little spiritual connections were probably similar to yours, Rob. Like I found it through like takalo, or through like songs, or through like little things, like little performing arts is where I found it. But I never really like lived it and experienced it until I went to Full in Mutalau. And I went there randomly, and this dog, I saw this like ugly dog in the bush, and it looked so like out of this world, eh? And I was like, what the hell? This dog's like staring at me. And the dog was like telling me to follow it. Like, it's like it was speaking to me, telling me to come. So I followed this dog all the way into the middle of the bush, nowhere. And up until, just to give you some context, up until that point, that was 2015. So I went up to perform in Niue with a show. But prior to that, I always hated Niuean stuff and Niuean people and Niuean things. And I was like, oh, they're just going to judge me. And they're going to be like, oh, oh, yeah, we know your family. You know what Niueans are like here in Auckland. And I just was burnt by that experience. And I didn't really want to go to Niue. And I remember my first experience of Niue, I hated it because I was so like in a colonized mindset coming from New Zealand. I went up in jeans and like a long top. And I was like, nah, I'm not going to. I just like tried not to dive into anything Niuean until 2015. I went into, and then I saw that dog, and then the dog took me into the middle of the bush, and I didn't know what it was doing. But this really ugly dog took me to Full where the fortress was, where Pene Amina came and where they prayed and stuff. So that was where the Christianity first came to Niue. And then the dog just looked at me and it gave me this look, and then it went poof, and it disappeared into like the middle of nowhere and left me in this like in the middle of the bush. And I just began crying hard out, and I had this like massive spiritual experience. Found the Holy Spirit, and I was like, oh, this is like, for me, that was the connection of spirituality to Niue, was through visiting that one place that I've never been to before. And then through that, I came back and I fell in love with everything else that was Niue. So I get what you're saying. It's like, when you're in New Zealand, you grasp onto whatever little thing you can grasp onto to try and get your spiritual connection. And for you, that's probably takalo. For probably most of my brothers and cousins, that would be the takalo as well. So I don't know what the point of the story was, but that's what I'm trying to say is like that's not our only thing for spirituality. And whilst that is something like yes, great, grasp onto it and grasp onto that story. When I actually asked Brad, like, why is that takalo? Like, what does it mean? Like, I was like, is your dad trying to just say that we're savages and stuff like that? And he goes, no, it's actually a dedication to I think it's the war god or deity. It's called Fisikila. And it's in the verse 2 of that takalo. There's like, it acknowledges him. And then I was like, oh, now I have a deeper understanding. But it is perpetuating it is reliving the narrative of the Captain James Cook story, but it's deeper than just that on the surface level. Yeah. Where am I going with this? I just kind of like went off. But yeah, definitely hold on to that and keep exploring it. When I learned the Takalos now, I always ask what they mean and like what, because there's always a deeper meaning to stuff in Niue, even like the songs and all the compositions and things that we learn. Like they're not just like kumbaya sitting around the fire with the marshmallow. They've got like some real hidden meanings in it, and that's so cool when we unlock those. So I totally vibe with that. You're finding that spirituality through lyrics and through the narratives of the stories and stuff. But what Auntie Jo said, yeah, keeping our stories alive, as long as the heart is there to keep the stories alive of the tupuna.
I think Samantha had a comment there. Sam, did you want to share your comment there? I think it's referring to Leki.
Leki mo Sam. Just wanted to add my 5 cents, if you want to call it, to the seminar today regarding the Tagalo, and I think it comes down to our understanding of the meaning of the Tagalo to yourself as a person, to be able to have the courage to learn about the culture, where the Tagalo comes from, what does it mean to you as a person, and also the concept of when or where to express yourself in an occasion, and in the most respective way, really, most certainly for the younger generations who born and grew up in New Zealand and here in Australia. But the thing that you guys touched a lot on was educating our people to when I don't know how to really put it. So, and it comes to being Niuean as well, people's perception, being judgmental, because it's in our culture. It's in us to, refer to people going, there is no wrong or right way of performing a takalo. It all depends on the occasion. And for my family alone, the purpose for us when we do the takalo is to honor our forefathers, pay respect to our loved ones who's been and gone before us, and it's usually with birthdays or weddings that we do this sort of thing, and it's not the Kai Tagata Takalo, which is a lot of our young generations these days thinks that the Kai Tagata Takalo is for any occasion, and it all comes down to their understanding of how it's worded. So I mean, that's basically my understanding of Takalo for my family, and it's been passed on to generations, and it's something that we teach our kids, and it's not just you getting up and performing a Takalo because it's something that's expected of you. You got to understand where it comes from And then, and touch basing on how Sam and Leki felt when they actually made the trip to Niue, and just that connection for you guys, not, you know, not being born and brought up in Niue, which is a great thing. And if you guys can just encourage people to find themselves and learn about the culture, which should be the encouragement, I guess, for the younger generations. Whakaelahi koe nei atau lima sene haku.
Oi tūrau ki tau mana tu whakakise e me tau mui e ma Sam ki he awhiawhi nei. Whai uhufu ki na kai?
E, whai huhu ma whakau, whai tala o ki tala ki muto.
Ia, kanu mea mo nei, whakau e?
Whakalawhalai atu ki muto rosi, ko ko tori e Makaala, te muto hahu ko Luisa Pusmani, Makaala mo Loavasa Hukui Makaala. Kwau e sahina taseha Samantha, ne tutala moia. I just have some comments. I've been listening sporadically throughout the whole seminar today, and it's been a great topic just to cover in terms of what we view it as being in New Zealand and in Australia, because it is different in Niue. The understanding is different in Niue, and the way it's performed in Niue is different. And we just have to probably define what we're absorbing from Niue and interpreting in the Western world, whether we are doing it traditionally to what we've learned from Niue, or we are enhancing it and making it a New Zealand-based Niue Takalo or an Australian-based Niue Takalo. Because for the Niueans back at home, it's a Takalo for them and how they express from the land, and that whole spiritual thing everyone touched on how they feel when they go home. There's differences in how you see home and how you can perform how you feel. I've mainly grown up in New Zealand, and in terms of the takalo for me, I grew up only knowing it as a male performance piece, never in any way that a female could take part, let alone stand there and chant with them. But then there was something that my mum taught us that there was a time period in the old days where the warriors would be gone and there'd be no one to defend the homestead. So it would be the purpose, or it would be left up to the women left behind with the children to defend themselves and to deter the attackers, whoever were coming. And that gave them empowerment and had their own chants and levels. And because of that, my mum taught my Polyfest group for my final year. And that I understood it, and I understood what she wrote in it. It wasn't anything about savagery, it was about discovery and how Niue came about with all the wars. And then in that performance piece, we won that category. But not to brag that we won, but when I got home, in my own family, within my sisters, it was a huge disagreement because 20 years before that, my older sister had performed in Polyfest, and her initial introduction to the Polyfest was, it's a male only, these are the rules, this is how New Zealand is going to be different from Niue. And then in the new modern day, we've changed it where the girls from AGS are performing takalos. And they weren't doing it in that whole Tagata savagery way. It was all in a way that made sense to my mum and how she would express it. But the thing that disappointed me, not only was my sister right in aspects that it is, the takalo itself is a male thing. There's a chant for women in their own defense for war. But in how my mum taught it to me and how I was expressing it with the girls in my group, it was more ashamed how I could understand it, I could feel it, and all the love that I was performing it out there. But the girls in my group, it didn't cut deep with them. It was, we had the Samoan kids, the Māori kids, we had the Palangis, we had some Niueans, but sometimes when you know your culture and you are trying to express it in a way that you're feeling it spiritually, it's really hard to showcase it to an audience that doesn't know the finer details of it. So I just want to say that it's good we're talking about it. It'd be great to have like proper guidelines and have new chants, because the kaitangata and the savage ones are not only overused, they're just old and actually really boring now. Like I want to hear something different, and not different, like bad different, but like an original, but like attributes back to the history of Niue and the people of Niue, and something that obviously the Niueans and Niue would be proud of to explain and share that, oh yeah, those are our Niuean relatives over there in Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, whoalahi, kia koe mai o mo tau mahakitanga hau, ke ngahua ni tau se ahone. Awit tolo.
Awit tolo, whakawelahi matoli. 5 minutes, Sam. Well, just looking at the time, we've got 12 more minutes. I think I'll hand it over to Sam to have a few remarks to Toli's comment there, and then we'll round it up. I'll hand it over to Zora to give us the final remarks for our Tagata Pulotu seminar for today and the series as well. Whakawela.
Pai tu tala o ma.
Kai kama, yeah, tuku atu ka kai mone.
Koe whala whātu whaua ke atua ko mai ka te tulu ke whiwhi hea whiwhi. Koe manako au koe wangahau atu tunga e wangahau e tomatua. Ke whangawhana atu am tōre tau whata. Tō hai whia me whaue. Ke am tōre tau Pulotu. Io, Sam, Leki, mo Zora. E lai whia hako tu tala ke he tomata kupu nei. Taonga, mai kai tangata. Ko manatu. Kamata mai tausi, koe leo whoki kia hai. Tō lahi mahuinga e tu talanga te tōri a whiawhi nei. E longa mai longa tō tala. Kai mōri, e kisi ki ai, Polyfest is a starting point. Ka kumtore tō whāta, ke ona onu ki ai, ha whēmana ni mitaki ki ai. Vehe hako anako tuhi au te ohele he pepa. Hako kisi anga, e tōru vehe hanga hako ni manako ke kisia. E ingane tangata, ka malolo e mga whaoa, e mahuenga lau tōru. Ka ei loa e whalo mga whaoa tau se hepe tongana nā tau tōru ni pehe. Whakaue whewhe ke kai tangata. No way ke whakaue ke kai tangata hako anā kai hako. Ka e lahi whia me whakaue ko mai ka tau tōru ke tūtala. Ko mtōre tau whuata, ham tōru ta waha ke tau se. Hako manatu, ai leo tangata. Ka ole ke tau Pulotu ke tu mamatua, ne mahaini mai loa, tau se hingo e whekau nei, ka watala, ne aua te o ki tua tau tōru. So ka haka tau kupulanga matai atu ki am tōru, ngā hua ki ai. Si monuhina, monuhina tō ngā hua ham tōru. Ko haka ne tako puia, whakamawhana te waka ham tōru he o, ham tōru kia.
Ia, o i tūro ki tau te whatofa i mamatoko, Lene ke mga whiwhinei, ma whana lahi tau manatu pihia ke o moe tau atu hau whuata tau tōru tau Pulotu he tau wahane ki asi hake motu tau tō. Whakawela ki tau manatu. Ka tiwa ki atu ki a Sam, tō whakaose moe atu liwa ki atu moe ki a Zora, ke whakaose mai tau tōru hea whiwhinei. Whakawe.
Whaue ki he matua, ma Lene, ki tau manatu whakisi ki lata ia mahat. Tau tolu a whakatūtalanga ki he, tau se tanga hoa. Wa lewa te ne whae tūtala i poe tukini e tau comment ke Facebook. I think, the talk is easy and the discussion, albeit sometimes a little bit awkward, is the easy part. The other part is the work. And so whaue ki hawa tau kup, kua tofa mai kia o tolu. I think just to sum up, and lots of people have said lots of different things, is there's work ahead to be done. I think it's nice to acknowledge, as Leki has put, that Polyfest is an important platform for our young people in particular. There is no other platform as big as it is anywhere in the world where Niue dance is prevalent. And I guess as what we have suggested in this seminar thus far is that there may be some perhaps some clarity that could be provided and the work that is done by Toa Mataala, which is the committee that runs that stage, be it Leki, Ioane, or myself, or others, if there's some hands, like there's some work to be done there in supporting them, and also supporting the work that our young people do to express themselves at the Niue stage. And that there is that. And then I also think there is some work to be done in the community in terms of when Polyfest is finished, there is nothing really else. The learning, so to speak, stops. And then we just refer to what we did at Polyfest times, and then we go to YouTube. And then we replicate the same things, be it good or bad, or in between. And so the Kalo project that we worked on last year was just one project that perhaps could operate in that space to give Niue men an opportunity to come together, to learn off each other, and to work together. I think we can acknowledge that I'm in the same way that Carlos is sometimes hard to compare ourselves. But if we use that instance, is that some of our other Pacific cousins, they have spaces where they can come together. The Tongans have kava, they come together, they can express their Tonganness, and etc. Samoans have dance, they have the tau, they have lots of other things. And I don't want to digress into another topic, but one of the main things we only have as Niue men, especially here in Auckland, is just coming together and having a drink. And in terms of the literature, academic literature out there, the only stuff that focuses on Niue men is drinking behavior. I'm not going to go down and talk about all of that, but I think we need to create more spaces that are in tune culturally, that are inclusive, that are safe, with people of varying cultural knowledge, to come in and take bite-sized bites at the language, at the culture, and be uplifted, to be confident, just going, you are as Niuean as you are. You are a Niuean, that is enough. Learn as you go, and the learning will continue on. And you can do that in these sort of spaces. But I also think we need to encourage our people to take that back out into the community as well. Take it back into your families. And it is what it is. Our people sometimes don't know how to say encouragement using nice words. They will encourage you saying all the other words. So, but you just use it as an encouragement, and then you grow from there. I think again, kwa whitakua lo te salamu haku. I think that was just to sum up. Lots of really good conversation here. Thank you to Io and Leki. And then everyone's conversations to building this as a community conversation and a community work ahead for all of us to work together. But I'll hand it over to you, Zora. Thank you.
Kawelahi Sam. Mga hone tuku atu ke he tata kita ki mai e Tupumaiaga Niue Trust ke whakausia mai tolu ke whalato manatu. Ke whakausia ki e Tagata Pulotu Seminar Series ke onua ki he tautolu. Kausia si ole atu ke he tautolu a tupuna na kai koe matua ko Leki ke whakausia tautolu ke he riongi he awhiawhi nei whakamare male.
Whakalofalai atu, can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay, I just want to say thank you to everyone. And one thing I just wanted to say about Polyfest, be mindful when you go into that stage that people are totally focused on Polyfest, and sometimes they can't see anything, but my kids are on the stage, you know, and then a new group goes up and yeah, some might not have that patience, but I know what you mean, Leki. It's definitely the place to start, but yeah, and Tomatala. Okay, that's okay. I've written it in Ioane. Whakaoelahi ki he tau kapisinga ne kua whakalataha, ki he tau Tagata Pulotu he aho nei. Whakaoelahi mahaki ki a Sam, Leki mo Io, ki he hana Pulotu mahuinga, ki he takalo, Tuko atu e tau whakaoi lahi mahaki kia Ministry of Pacific People, Unitec Pacific Centre, Tupumaiaga Niue Trust, Dr. Colin Tukuitonga, Dr. Nuhisifa Williams, Moe lilifu koe I o Aleke whawai ke he taunga hua pulotu mai he kamataanga. Monuina mai he atua o Etulo. Thank you. This is our last session, number 6 for the Pulotu series. Thank you for all your hard work, Io, and everyone who has joined these sessions. And yeah, it's been really, we had some really good talks, and it's nice to finish with the takalo, because I think that takalo took up the whole 2 hours, Io. Yeah, so congratulations to you guys. Yeah, it took up the whole complete time, but that's all. Owetilo.
Yeah, just a big thank you once again for all the participants who have been joining us on the last five weeks since our Tagata Pulotu seminar series started. And I believe it's a great initiative, a space where our knowledge holders, researchers, emerging researchers and academics can share their experiences and the work that they're doing in their spaces. On that note, next week I'll be sending out a survey, evaluation form. If you could please provide some feedback on how we can improve, because I think this is a great initiative where we can probably develop and have more of it for our tangata Niue and diaspora, and also on Niue. Whakawelahi, tuku atu ki Aleke he mga honei, ke whakose te tolu ki Riong. Whakawelahi.
Hello. Pu Feilo ki moa he toa ke nau. Ki moa he matua matama. Liongi au loa, liongi e ki. Matolo matona e, haha e langi. Kia tapu hao hingoa. Kia hoko mai hao.
Koutou.
Kia eke hao.
Whina ngalo ke lalo langi nei. Tamina kai. Ke lako mai hata.
Matolo a tamina kai ke la.
Mai hata. Tunga lo tolu ne ek
Mangalo mai koia matolo. Alo atu ki ala tolu. Ne eke saka ke lea
Kere mai ke matulu.
Au ne ke ute koia matolo. Kala vea ki mai koia matolo.
Tamina kere. Ako mena haha koe kautu mai malolo. Katoa mai whakakea. Tukulangi amene.
Amen. E noe matua matama.